Commander Jake Morrison had seen his share of strange worlds during his 15 years with the Terran Exploration Corps, but Kepler 442b still managed to surprise him. The planet hung in space like a jewel of blues and greens, its twin suns casting ethereal shadows across continents that seemed to shift and breathe with life. What the orbital scans hadn't prepared him for was the weather.
The storm had come from nowhere, a wall of violet rain that moved across the landscape like a living thing. Jake's shuttle had been forced down in what his instruments told him was a safe zone. But safe was relative when you were alone on an alien world, with communication systems fried and backup power running low.
He'd found shelter in what appeared to be ruins of some ancient civilization. The structures were elegant, flowing like frozen water, made from a material that seemed to absorb and reflect light in impossible ways.
The architecture suggested a people who valued beauty as much as function, with sweeping arches and delicate spires that somehow managed to look both ancient and timeless. Jake was examining strange symbols carved into a wall when he heard the sound.
It was musical, almost like singing, but with an underlying note of distress that made his hand instinctively move to his sidearm. He'd learned long ago that beautiful things could be the most dangerous in the galaxy. The source of the sound appeared at the entrance to his shelter, and Jake's breath caught in his throat. She was humanoid but clearly alien, standing perhaps 5.5 feet tall, with skin that seemed to shimmer between pale blue and silver. Her hair, if it could be called that, flowed like liquid starlight, and her eyes were large and luminous, the color of deep ocean water. She wore what looked like living fabric that moved and shifted with her breathing, responding to her emotions with subtle changes in hue and pattern. She saw him and stopped, those large eyes widening with what appeared to be surprise and fear. For a moment they stared at each other across the ancient chamber, two beings from different worlds thrown together by chance and storm. Jake slowly raised his hands, palms outward, in what he hoped was a universal gesture of peace. "Easy," he said softly, his voice echoing slightly in the stone chamber.
"I'm not going to hurt you."
The alien girl tilted her head, studying him with an intelligence that was unmistakably sentient. When she spoke, her voice was like wind chimes in a gentle breeze, musical and ethereal, but the words were in no language Jake had ever heard.
His translation implant, a standard piece of Terran tech that could decode most known languages, remained frustratingly silent. Either this was a completely unknown dialect, or the technology of her people operated on frequencies his equipment couldn't interpret. Jake tried again, this time pointing to himself. "Jake?" he said clearly. "Jake Morrison." Understanding flickered in her eyes. She pressed a delicate hand to her chest and spoke a word that sounded like music itself. Lyrally. The name seemed to hang in the air between them. Beautiful and strange. Outside, the storm continued to rage. The violet rain struck the ancient stones with a sound like distant drums, and flashes of what looked like lightning but moved too slowly illuminated the ruins in brief, spectacular displays. Jake had seen the weather reports from orbit. This wasn't just rain, but something far more complex, possibly even alive. Lyrally moved closer, her movements graceful and cautious. She gestured toward the storm outside, then to Jake, then to herself. Even without words, her meaning was clear. They were both trapped here until the weather passed. Jake nodded and gestured to the shelter around them. "Looks like we're roommates for a while," he said, knowing she couldn't understand but hoping his tone would convey friendliness. As if responding to his words, Lyrale's clothing shifted to warmer colors, golds and soft greens that seemed to indicate a relaxation of her initial fear. She moved to one of the carved walls and touched it with her palm. The ancient symbols began to glow with a soft, warm light that filled the chamber with a pleasant ambiance. Jake's eyebrows rose. "Handy," he murmured. His own equipment could provide light, but nothing so elegant or seamless. Lyrale gestured for him to come closer to the wall. When he approached, she took his hand, her touch cool and somehow electric, and pressed his palm against the stone beside hers. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, additional symbols began to glow, different from hers but clearly responsive to his touch. "Interesting," Jake said, studying the patterns. The symbols that responded to him were more angular, geometric, while hers were flowing and organic. Looks like this place was built for more than one species. Over the next few hours, as the storm continued its relentless assault outside, Jake and Lyrali began the slow process of communication. It started with simple gestures and pointing, basic concepts like hunger, thirst, and comfort. Jake shared some of his emergency rations, noting with interest that Lyrali examined them carefully before eating,
her large eyes studying the texture and composition with scientific curiosity.
In return, she produced what looked like crystalline fruits from a pouch that seemed much larger inside than outside. The fruits tasted like a combination of honey and starlight, if starlight had a flavor, and seemed to energize Jake in ways that went beyond mere nutrition.
As the hours passed, Jake began to piece together fragments of Lyrelai's situation.
Through careful gestures and drawings in the dust on the floor, she managed to convey that she was part of an expedition, like him. Her people were explorers, scientists perhaps, studying something about this world.
But something had gone wrong. Her team was scattered, possibly lost, and she'd been searching for them when the storm struck. Jake showed her his disabled communications equipment, the fried circuits and dead displays that left him cut off from his ship in orbit. Lyrelai examined the technology with the same careful attention she'd given his food, her fingers tracing the components with surprising familiarity. When she looked up at him, there was something in her expression that made Jake's pulse quicken. It wasn't attraction exactly, though he couldn't deny she was beautiful in an utterly alien way. It was recognition, the look of someone who had found a kindred spirit in an unexpected place. The storm showed no signs of abating.
If anything, it seemed to be growing stronger. Through the entrance to their shelter, Jake could see the violet rain beginning to glow with an inner light, and the lightning that wasn't quite lightning had taken on patterns that looked almost deliberate.
Lyrelai noticed his concern and moved to stand beside him at the entrance. She spoke in her musical language, the tone urgent and explanatory. When Jake looked confused, she tried again, this time using the few human words she seemed to have picked up during their hours together. Storm, not natural, she managed, her accent turning the simple words into something like a song. Dangerous, very dangerous. Jake felt a chill that had nothing to do with the alien weather. You mean this isn't just rain? Lyrelai shook her head emphatically, then moved to the carved wall. She pressed her hands against it and the symbols responded, showing what looked like a complex pattern or map. She pointed to various glowing sections, then to the storm outside, her meaning gradually becoming clear. The storm was some kind of defense system, ancient and automated, triggered by their presence on this world. The ruins they sheltered in weren't just buildings. They were part of a vast network designed to protect something. And they were trapped in the middle of it. As if responding to their growing understanding, the storm outside intensified. The violet light became blinding, and the sound of the rain became a roar that shook the ancient stones around them.
Jake checked his equipment again, hoping against hope that something might be working. But the readings were worse than before. Whatever energy the storm was putting out was actively interfering with his technology. Lyrelai watched him with growing concern. She could see his frustration, his fear, though he tried to hide it behind the stoic demeanor of a career military officer. When their eyes met, she did something unexpected. She moved closer to him, close enough that he could feel the subtle warmth radiating from her alien form.
Her large eyes held his, and in them Jake saw not just intelligence but compassion, understanding, and something that transcended species barriers. She spoke again, her voice soft but urgent, gesturing between them and then toward the storm.
Even without perfect translation, her meaning was becoming clear. They needed each other to survive this.
The storm, the defense system, whatever it wasn't just about survival. There was an offer there, a willingness to trust him completely, to share not just shelter but something more intimate. In her alien way, Lyrelai was offering herself, not as payment or barter, but as a gesture of absolute trust and partnership.
Jake felt the weight of that offer, the cultural and biological barriers it crossed, the courage it represented. Here was a being from another world, as far from human as anything he'd ever encountered, offering the most precious things she had to give, complete trust and vulnerability.
The storm raged around their shelter, alien energies crackling through the ancient stones, and Jake realized that his answer to her unspoken offer might determine not just whether they survived the night, but whether two species from different corners of the galaxy might find common ground in the face of the unknown. He looked into Lyrelai's luminous eyes, seeing his own uncertainty reflected there, but also hope.
Whatever happened next would change both of them forever, and as the alien storm continued its supernatural assault on their refuge, Jake began to understand that some encounters transcend all boundaries of species, culture, and origin. The ancient ruins around them seemed to pulse with anticipation, as if they too were waiting to see what choice a human and an alien would make when faced with the infinite loneliness of space and the precious opportunity for connection that had brought them together in this impossible place. Outside, the storm sang its alien song, and inside their shelter, Two beings from different worlds stood on the threshold of understanding that would reshape everything they thought they knew about the universe and their place in it. Jake Morrison had made difficult decisions before. He'd commanded ships in hostile territory, made split-second choices that determined the fate of entire crews, faced down alien predators that could tear apart a human body in seconds. But standing in that ancient chamber, with Lyrale's luminous eyes fixed on his, he realized that none of those experiences had prepared him for this moment.
The storm outside had evolved into something that defied his understanding of weather patterns. The violet rain now fell upward in places, forming spirals and geometric patterns that suggested intelligence behind the chaos. The lightning moved like living creatures, branching and rejoining in ways that reminded him of neural networks or the firing patterns of synapses in a vast alien brain. Lyrale's offer hung in the air between them, unspoken but clear. She stood close enough that he could see the subtle patterns that moved beneath her shimmering skin like living tattoos, close enough to smell her strange, sweet scent that reminded him of ozone and blooming flowers. Her clothing continued to shift colors, now showing deep blues and purples that seemed to mirror the storm outside, while somehow maintaining an undertone of warmth and invitation. Jake raised his hand slowly, not to touch her, but to gesture for patience, for time to think. The last thing he wanted was to misunderstand her offer, or respond in a way that would dishonor the trust she was placing in him. Lyrale, he said softly, testing the musical syllables of her name. When she tilted her head in acknowledgement, he continued, knowing she couldn't understand his words but hoping his tone would convey his meaning. I'm honored, truly. 7.
But I need you to know that where I come from, we don't enter into something like this lightly.
She watched him speak, her large eyes never leaving his face. When he finished, she moved to the glowing wall and pressed her palm against it again. The symbols responded, but this time they formed new patterns, more complex arrangements that seemed to tell a story. Jake moved closer, studying the flowing lights. Gradually, he began to understand what she was showing him. The images depicted two figures, one roughly humanoid like himself, the other matching Lyrale's graceful form. They were working together, their combined touch on the ancient mechanisms creating harmonies of light that neither could achieve alone. You're saying we're stronger together, Jake murmured.
That whatever this place is, whatever that storm is, we need to work as a team to understand it. Lyrale nodded emphatically, then touched the wall again. The images changed, showing the storm system from above, a vast spiral of energy that covered half the continent. But where their shelters sat, there was a calm spot, an eye in the hurricane that existed only because of their combined presence. Jake's breath caught.
We're not just hiding from the storm, we're changing it. Our being here together, it's affecting the defense system somehow. Lyrale's clothing brightened to gold and white. Colors that he was learning indicated excitement or joy. She reached out and took his hand, her touch sending small electrical sensations up his arm. When she pressed his palm against the wall, alongside hers, the entire chamber erupted in gentle, musical light.
The storm outside began to quiet. Jake stared at the readings on his still functional environmental scanner, watching as the energy levels dropped and the chaotic patterns began to resolve into something more orderly.
Incredible, he whispered. It's like the system is recognizing us as what? A team? Partners?
Lyrale spoke in her musical language, a long stream of words that sounded urgent and explanatory. Though he couldn't understand the individual meanings, Jake caught the emotional undertones, excitement, discovery, and an underlying current of something deeper. She gestured to herself, then to him, then to the glowing symbols on the wall. Her meaning gradually became clear. The ancient civilization that had built this place hadn't been one species. It had been a partnership, a joining of different peoples working together. The defense system wasn't designed to keep intruders out. It was designed to test them, to see if they were capable of the same kind of cooperation. And the offer you made, Jake said slowly, understanding beginning to dawn.
It wasn't just about attraction or even survival. It was about proving we could trust each other completely.
That we could work together. Lyrale's eyes sparkled with what looked suspiciously like approval, and she nodded. But then she did something that surprised him. She spoke a single word in accented but clear English. More. Jake blinked.
More?
What do you mean, more? Instead of answering directly, Lyrale moved to another section of wall and activated different symbols. These showed images that made Jake's heart race. Star maps, ship designs, technology that looked far beyond anything either of their civilizations had achieved. What about this division? And at the center of it all, the same motif. Different species working together,
their combined efforts unlocking capabilities that neither could achieve alone. This is what they left behind, Jake breathed. Not just buildings or artifacts. Knowledge. Technology. Maybe even a map to something bigger. Lorelei nodded again, then turned to face him fully. When she spoke this time, it was in a mixture of her own language and the few English words she'd learned, but her meaning was unmistakable. We together find. My people, your people. Bring here, learn. Grow, strong. The implications hit Jake like a physical blow. This wasn't just about surviving the storm or even about first contact between their species. This was about something much larger. The ancient civilization had left behind a test, and by passing it, Jake and Lorelei had unlocked access to knowledge that could revolutionize both their peoples, but it would require trust. This is the book. He is a dog. Complete trust, the kind of partnership that transcended species barriers and required them to share not just information but themselves. Jake looked at Lorelei's alien features, at the hope and determination in her luminous eyes, and made his decision. He moved closer to her, close enough that their breaths mingled in the space between them.
Yes, he said simply.
Yes to all of it. The partnership, the trust, the work we need to do together. But Lorelei, he paused, searching for the right words. Where I come from, when two beings commit to this kind of partnership, it means something. It means we're responsible for each other. It means we don't abandon each other no matter how difficult things get. Lorelei's clothing shifted to the brightest gold Jake had seen yet, and she spoke a string of words in her own language that sounded like an oath or a promise. Then, carefully, she took both his hands in hers. The moment their skin made contact, something extraordinary happened. Jake felt a rush of sensation that was part electrical, part emotional, and entirely overwhelming. For just an instant, he could sense what Lorelei was feeling: excitement, determination, affection, and an alien equivalent of what humans might call love, though it felt broader and deeper than any emotion he'd experienced. Through that connection, he also caught glimpses of her memories. Her people, the Kyroleth, were explorers and scientists, but they were dying. Their home system was failing, their star growing unstable, and they had perhaps a generation left before they would need to find a new home. This expedition to ancient worlds wasn't just scientific curiosity. It was a desperate search for salvation. When the connection faded, Jake found himself looking at Lorelei with new understanding. Her offer hadn't been casual or impulsive. For her people, this kind of mental and emotional linking was the deepest form of commitment possible. She had literally offered to share her mind with him. Your people are in trouble, he said softly. That's why you're here. You're looking for technology, or knowledge, or maybe a new home. Lorelei nodded, tears forming in her large eyes. She spoke haltingly in English. Home dying. People scared. Need hope. Jake felt something shift inside his chest. A warmth that had nothing to do with the alien environment, and everything to do with the being standing before him. In her face, he saw the same determination and courage that he'd seen in human explorers and pioneers throughout history. The same willingness to risk everything for the chance to save their people. Then we work together, he said firmly. My people, your people. We share what we learn here. We help each other. The storm outside had almost completely subsided now, the violet rain fading to a gentle mist that sparkled with residual energy. But inside their shelter, something new was beginning. Jake and Lorelei moved back to the glowing wall, their hands touching the ancient symbols together. This time, the response was spectacular. The entire chamber filled with three-dimensional images of star systems, trade routes, and what looked like a vast network of ancient sites spread across the galaxy. Each site pulsed with its own rhythm, and gradually Jake realized he was looking at some kind of communication system, a way for different species to share knowledge and coordinate efforts across interstellar distances. It's a network, he whispered. A way to connect civilizations. And we just activated it. Lorelei spoke urgently in her own language, pointing to various systems in the display. Jake caught her meaning. Some of the sites were dark, their civilizations lost to time or disaster. But others still pulsed with life. Active nodes in a network that spanned the galaxy. Among them, Jake recognized the distinctive signature of human space, and Lorelei pointed excitedly to what must be the territory of her own people. But there were others too, dozens of active civilizations, all potentially accessible through this ancient system. We're not alone, Jake said, wonder filling his voice. None of us are alone. There's been a network here all along, waiting for species to mature enough to access it. Lorelei nodded, then moved closer to him. This time, when she spoke, her words were careful and deliberate,
English mixed with her own language but clear in meaning. You, me. First. Test passed. Now, bring others. Build together. The weight of responsibility settled on Jake's shoulders. They had stumbled onto something that could change the course of both their civilizations, maybe even the galaxy itself. But it would require unprecedented cooperation and trust between species that had never even met. Looking at Lyrelay, at the hope and determination in her alien features, Jake felt a surge of something he hadn't experienced since his academy days. The absolute certainty that he was part of something larger than himself, something that could make the universe a better place. The storm had passed, but their real journey was just beginning. And as the ancient chamber continued to pulse with new light around them, Jake Morrison, human, and Lyrelay Kyroleth stood together at the threshold of a new age of interstellar cooperation, their partnership the first bridge between worlds and what might become the greatest alliance the galaxy had ever seen. 3 days had passed since the storm subsided, and Jake Morrison found himself living in a reality that challenged everything he thought he knew about human limitations. The ancient chamber had become their base of operations, its walls now permanently aglow with symbols that responded to their combined touch. Each day brought new revelations as they learned to work together, their partnership deepening in ways that transcended mere cooperation. Lyrelay had proven to be not just beautiful and intelligent, but possessed of capabilities that continually amazed Jake. Her people's biotechnology was so advanced it seemed like magic. She could interface directly with the ancient systems, her nervous system somehow compatible with technology that was millions of years old. More remarkably, she was teaching Jake to do the same. Feel, not think, she instructed in her improving English, her hand guiding his to a new section of wall they hadn't yet explored. Your people, you think too much. Feel with heart-mind. Jake pressed his palm against the cool surface, trying to quiet the analytical part of his brain that wanted to understand how the technology worked. Instead, he focused on the sensation of Lyrelay's presence beside him, the growing connection between them that seemed to make his human consciousness more flexible, more adaptable. The wall responded with a soft chime, and suddenly Jake's mind filled with images. Not the holographic displays they'd been working with, but direct mental input that bypassed his eyes entirely. He saw star charts that oriented themselves to his thoughts, technical specifications that adapted to his level of understanding, and most remarkably, he felt the presence of other minds across the galaxy, ancient and alien intelligences that had left echoes of themselves in this network. Incredible, he breathed, opening his eyes to find Lyrelay watching him with pride and affection. I can feel them, the builders of this place. They're not gone. Not entirely. They left pieces of themselves behind. Lyrelay's clothing shifted to warm gold, a color Jake had learned indicated deep satisfaction.
Yes.
They wait for children to grow up, to be ready for big thoughts, big dreams. Over the past 3 days, their ability to communicate had improved dramatically, whether it was the ancient technology enhancing their neural pathways or simply the natural process of two intelligent beings working together. They were developing what could only be called a shared vocabulary that transcended language barriers. Jake had also begun to understand the true scope of what they'd discovered. The network wasn't just a communication system or a repository of knowledge. It was a test and a gift left behind by a civilization that had faced the same challenges that now confronted both humanity and the Kyrolith. Resource depletion, stellar instability, the need to expand beyond their home systems or face extinction. The builders had found a solution, but it required something that had been rare in their time and was apparently still rare now: genuine cooperation between different species. The network would only fully activate for partnerships, for beings who had proven they could trust each other completely and work together toward shared goals. What made it even more remarkable was how it enhanced the capabilities of those partnerships. Jake found his own human intuition and problem-solving abilities amplified when working with Lyrelay, while her biotechnological gifts became more versatile and powerful when guided by human analytical thinking. Together, they were accomplishing things that neither could have achieved alone. The proof came on their 3rd day when they successfully activated the site's long-range communication array. The system came online with a harmony of light and sound that filled the entire chamber, and suddenly they were connected to the galaxy-spanning network they'd only seen images of before. Dozens of active nodes pulsed in Jake's awareness, each one representing a world where other partnerships were working with the ancient technology. Some were familiar species combinations, but many were utterly alien. Partnerships between beings so different from each other that Jake could barely comprehend how they functioned together. Most importantly, they were able to send signals toward both human space and Kyrolith territory.
Within hours, they received responses that made Jake's heart pound with excitement and terror in equal measure. The first response came from Lyra Lee's people. Through the network's translation capabilities, Jake was able to understand the message from Kyrolith Command. Lyra Lee, daughter, your signal brings hope to dying stars. We send ships to your coordinates. Praise to the ancestor winds for your success. The human response took longer, filtered through multiple layers of military and civilian command. But when it came, it was characteristically blunt. Commander Morrison, whatever you've found down there has got the entire exploration corps buzzing. Admiral Chen is personally leading a task force to your location. Try not to start any interstellar incidents before we get there. Jake couldn't help but smile at the typically human mixture of excitement and caution. Looks like we're going to have company soon, he told Lyra Lee as they stood together before the glowing display of incoming ships from both their civilizations.
Lyra Lee's expression grew thoughtful, and for the first time since the storm, Jake saw uncertainty in her luminous eyes. Your people, my people, they understand? This. She gestured to the ancient chamber, to the two of them, to the connection they'd built together. This is bigger than just ships and trade. This is the book, it's about history. This is the book, it's about history. This is the book, it's about history.
Maybe for all the species in the network, learning to work together, not just out of necessity, but because we're better together than we are apart.
She nodded, relief evident in her features. Over the past 3 days, their relationship had evolved beyond mere cooperation or even alliance. The mental linking that was part of her species' nature had created a bond between them that was part friendship, part partnership, and part something that neither of their languages had words for.
Jake had felt his own consciousness expanding through that connection, his human creativity and adaptability enhanced by contact with Lyra Lee's more intuitive, biotechnologically integrated mindset. She, in turn, had gained new ways of analytical thinking and systematic problem-solving that her naturally empathic people sometimes lacked. But as the hours passed and the approaching fleets drew closer, both of them began to feel the weight of responsibility for what they'd started. First contact between their species was one thing, but they were about to introduce two civilizations to a galactic network that could reshape the balance of power throughout the known universe.
There's something else, Jake said as they reviewed the technical specifications the ancient system had been sharing with them. This network, it's not just about species working together.
Look at these energy readings, these resource distribution patterns. Lyra Lee studied the data, her brow furrowing in concentration.
Is like...
Body, she said slowly. Many parts, all connected, all helping each other stay healthy. Exactly. It's not just a communication network or even a trading system. It's a galactic ecosystem, designed to help civilizations share resources, knowledge, and support in a sustainable way. No more species dying because their star goes nova or their homeworld becomes uninhabitable. No more wars over scarce resources because there's a system for fair distribution.
The implications were staggering. Jake's own civilization was beginning to face resource constraints as human space expanded. Traditional solutions involve finding new worlds to exploit or competing with other species for valuable systems. But this network offered a third option, true cooperation that made all participants stronger and more sustainable.
Lyra Lee's people faced an even more immediate crisis, but Jake was beginning to understand that their situation wasn't unique. Throughout the galaxy, civilizations rose and fell as they exhausted their resources or faced stellar disasters. The network represented a way to break that cycle, to create a galactic civilization that could persist across geological timescales. As the first ships began to appear in orbit, Jake and Lyra Lee made a decision that would affect both their species for generations to come. Instead of waiting for their respective commanders to arrive and take charge of the situation, they activated the network's teaching protocols. The ancient chamber filled with new displays, comprehensive guides to the technology and philosophy behind the galactic network. But these weren't just technical manuals. They were immersive experiences designed to help beings understand not just how the system worked, but why it was necessary and how to participate in it responsibly.
When Admiral Chen's shuttle landed alongside the first Kyrolith vessels, they found Jake and Lyra Lee deep in communion with systems that were already beginning to transform their understanding of what civilization could become. The Admiral, a sharp-eyed woman who'd seen enough of the galaxy to be impressed by very little, stopped short at the sight of the glowing chamber and the two figures working together at its heart.
"Commander Morrison," she called out formally. "Report." Jake opened his eyes, returning to normal awareness, and turned to face his commanding officer. But when he spoke, his voice carried new harmonics, subtle changes that suggested his time with the network had altered him in fundamental ways.
Admiral, what we found here changes everything. This isn't just alien technology or even first contact with a new species.
This is a chance for humanity to join something larger, something that could solve every major challenge we're facing as a species.
Admiral Chen studied Jake's face, noting the changes in his expression, the way his eyes seemed to hold depths that hadn't been there before. And the cost? It was Lyrelay who answered, her English now flawless, enhanced by the network's linguistic integration systems.
The cost is trust, Admiral Chen. The cost is being willing to see other beings not as threats or resources, but as partners.
The cost is growing beyond the limitations that keep species isolated and struggling alone. Admiral Chen looked between the human commander and the alien scientist, seeing something in their interaction that went beyond mere cooperation.
They moved in unconscious harmony, anticipated each other's thoughts, and when their eyes met, there was a connection that transcended species barriers.
You two have become something new, she said quietly.
It wasn't a question. Jake nodded. We have. And if our species are willing to learn from what we've discovered, they can too. All the species in the network can. Admiral, we're looking at the end of scarcity, the end of isolation, the end of civilizations rising and falling alone. But it requires us to become something more than we've ever been before. Behind Admiral Chen, Kirilleth leaders emerged from their own vessels, beings of flowing grace and subtle beauty who moved with the same quiet authority that marked military commanders across species.
When they saw Lyrelay, their clothing shifted to colors that Jake had learned indicated amazement and pride. The real test was about to begin. Jake and Lyrelay had proven that human and Kirilleth could work together, could trust each other, could become stronger as a partnership than either was alone. Now they had to convince two entire civilizations to take the same leap of faith.
As beings from two different worlds gathered in the ancient chamber, drawn together by storm and chance and courage, the galaxy held its breath to see whether this moment would mark the beginning of a new age of cooperation, or the end of the most promising partnership the network had seen in millennia. The ancient chamber had become a convergence point for two civilizations, and Jake Morrison found himself at the center of the most important diplomatic moment in human history. Admiral Chen stood with military precision beside him, while across the glowing expanse of alien technology the Kirilleth delegation moved with their characteristic flowing grace. The air itself seemed to hum with potential and tension in equal measure. Lyrelay served as both translator and cultural bridge, her newfound fluency in human languages allowing her to convey not just words but meanings between species that had evolved on worlds separated by thousands of light years. Her clothing had settled into a pattern of gold and silver that Jake had learned indicated formal ceremony among her people, but the warm undertones showed she remained approachable, still the being who had offered herself in trust during the storm. The Kirilleth delegation wishes to understand, she said, addressing Admiral Chen directly, what guarantees humanity can offer that this technology will not be weaponized. In their history, great power has always led to great conflict. Admiral Chen's expression remained neutral, but Jake could see the calculation in her eyes. As a military leader, she understood the strategic implications of what they'd discovered better than anyone in the chamber. The ancient network represented capabilities that could render entire fleets obsolete or revolutionize interstellar warfare. The same guarantee the Kirilleth can offer us, the Admiral replied carefully. None, which is why this partnership approach is either the most dangerous idea in galactic history or the most necessary one. The Kirilleth leader, introduced as Melody of Deep Waters, responded in tones that sounded like wind through crystal formations. Lyrelay translated. She says humanity's honesty is refreshing. Most species they have encountered claim perfect intentions while planning conquests. But she asks, if trust cannot be guaranteed, how do we proceed? Jake stepped forward, feeling the weight of both civilizations' attention. Over the past week, his integration with the ancient network had given him insights that went beyond mere technical understanding. He'd felt the echoes of the Builders' own struggles with this exact problem, their solutions hard-won across millennia of trial and error. We proceed the same way Lyrelay and I did, he said simply, one step at a time, with complete transparency and mutual vulnerability. The network doesn't just enable cooperation, it requires it. The deeper you integrate with the system, the more impossible it becomes to hide hostile intentions from your partners. Admiral Chen's eyebrows rose sharply. Explain. Lyrelay moved to the central control wall, her hand inviting Jake to join her. When their palms touched the ancient surface together, the chamber filled with demonstration images that made several humans and Kirilleth alike step back in alarm. Watch, Lyrelay said softly. In the glowing display, two species appeared. One roughly humanoid, the other insectoid. They began working together with the network technology, their cooperation deepening over time. As their integration progressed, neural pathway diagrams showed how their consciousness began to merge at the edges, creating shared awareness that made deception impossible. Eventually, Jake continued, partners become something new,
Not losing their individual identity, but gaining a shared one that transcends species barriers. The network's ultimate safeguard is that the more power you gain access to, the more you have to trust your partners completely.
Admiral Chen studied the display with the calculating gaze of a career military officer. And if partnerships fail, what happens when beings with shared consciousness decide to break apart? The display shifted, showing the aftermath of such failures. Systems going dark. Technologies becoming inert. Entire regions of the galactic network shutting down to prevent misuse. The network protects itself, Lirelay explained. When trust breaks, access is lost. No species can use the technology alone, no matter how advanced they become. It encourages permanent cooperation or nothing at all. Melody of Deep Waters spoke again, her tones more urgent now. Lyra Lee's translation revealed growing excitement. She asks if we've confirmed this. Have we tested the limits of our own partnership? Jake and Lirelai exchanged a look that communicated volumes. Over the past week, their mental connection had deepened to levels that sometimes startled them both. Jake found himself occasionally knowing what Lirelai was thinking before she spoke, while she had begun to anticipate his analytical processes in ways that enhanced her own intuitive insights. We've scratched the surface, Jake admitted. The changes are significant.
I can access systems that are purely biotechnological, while Lirelay can interface with hardware that should require completely different neural structures. We're becoming something that's part human, part chirolith, part something entirely new.
Admiral Chen's expression remained carefully controlled, but Jake caught the flicker of concern in her eyes. And you're comfortable with that level of integration? Before Jake could answer, alarms began sounding from both human and chirolith ships in orbit. Within moments, communication systems crackled to life with urgent reports that made everyone in the chamber freeze. Admiral Chen, came the voice of her communications officer. We're detecting massive energy signatures throughout the system. Unknown contacts are dropping out of hyperspace at multiple coordinates. Melody of Deep Waters received similar reports from her own vessels, and the musical quality of chirolith speech took on undertones that needed no translation to convey alarm. Lirelai moved quickly to the network's sensor arrays, her integration with the systems allowing her to access information faster than conventional scanning. When she turned back to the group, her large eyes were wide with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. It's the network, she said. Our activation, our success as a partnership, it sent signals across the entire galactic web. Other species are responding. Jake joined her at the sensor display, his own enhanced awareness allowing him to interpret the data streams flooding through ancient communication channels. What he saw made his breath catch in his throat. Dozens of ships were arriving in the system, representing species from across the galaxy. Some were familiar from the network's historical files, ancient races that had been part of the original Builders Alliance. Others were newcomers like humanity and the chirolith, species that had only recently achieved the level of technological and social development necessary to access the network. It's a convergence, Jake said, understanding flooding through him. When a new partnership successfully activates a major network node, it triggers something like a galactic assembly. Representatives from all active members come to evaluate and welcome the new partners. Admiral Chen's hand moved instinctively toward her sidearm, a gesture that didn't go unnoticed by the Chirolith delegation. How many ships are we talking about, Commander? 43 distinct signatures so far, Lirelay reported. Energy profiles suggest technology levels ranging from slightly above our own to levels that don't register on our sensors. The implications hit everyone in the chamber simultaneously. Humanity and the Chirolith had stumbled into what amounted to galactic first contact, not just with each other but with potentially dozens of advanced civilizations simultaneously. The small diplomatic crisis of two species learning to work together had just become the most significant moment in the recorded history of both civilizations. But Jake found himself oddly calm, his enhanced awareness telling him something that conventional analysis might miss. It's not an invasion, he said firmly. Look at the formation patterns, the way they're maintaining distance from each other and from our vessels. This is a formal gathering, not a hostile fleet. Melody of Deep Waters spoke rapidly to her subordinates, then turned to address the mixed group through Lirelay's translation. The Kyrillith fleet is detecting communication attempts on multiple frequencies. They appear to be welcoming transmissions, invitations to participate in formal protocols. Admiral Chen looked between Jake and Lyreley, seeing something in their demeanor that even she couldn't quite identify. You two know something about this, don't you? Something you haven't shared yet. Lyreley and Jake exchanged another of their silent communications, and Jake nodded slightly. When we achieved full partnership status, we gained access to deeper layers of the network's memory banks. The convergence isn't just a diplomatic meeting. It's a test. What kind of test? Admiral Chen demanded. The kind that determines whether our species are ready to join the galactic community as full participants, Lyreley explained. Or whether we need more time to mature before we can handle the responsibilities that come with this level of technology and cooperation.
Jake activated the chamber's main display, showing the approaching fleet in detail.
The ships were magnificent, representing architectural and engineering traditions that spanned the galaxy. Some moved like living creatures, others appeared to be crystalline structures that manipulated space-time itself to achieve propulsion.
Few looked almost human in design, while others defied easy categorization. Each species in the network went through this process, Jake continued.
A convergence where they had to demonstrate not just that they could cooperate with one other species, but that they understood the principles of cooperation well enough to participate in a galactic civilization. Admiral Chen studied the display, her tactical mind automatically analyzing threat levels and potential responses.
But she was also beginning to understand that conventional military thinking might be inadequate for the situation they faced. What happens if we fail this test? She asked quietly. Lyreley's clothing shifted to muted colors, reflecting the gravity of the question. The network seals the node. Our species remain isolated until we achieve the necessary level of social and technological development independently. For the Kyrillith, that would mean extinction. Our sun will not wait for us to grow wise enough for a second chance. The weight of responsibility settled on everyone in the chamber. They weren't just representing their species in first contact. They were determining whether their civilizations would survive and thrive as part of something larger, or face the future alone. Dick looked at Admiral Chen, seeing the same determination in her features that had made her one of humanity's most successful military leaders. Admiral, I know this isn't what any of us expected when we started this mission.
But we have a chance here to give humanity something it's never had before. True allies. Partners who will share resources, knowledge, and the burden of survival itself.
And all it cost is our independence, Admiral Chen replied, though her tone suggested she was considering the trade-off seriously. No, Lyreley interjected softly. It costs our isolation. Independence becomes something shared between partners, not something hoarded by individual species. Stronger together, safer together, wiser together. Outside, the Convergence fleet had settled into orbital positions that formed a complex geometric pattern around the ancient world. Jake's enhanced awareness told him they were waiting, patient as civilizations that had learned to think in terms of geological time rather than individual lifespans. The real test was about to begin, and everything both species had ever been or might become hung in the balance of the next few hours. Convergence began at dawn on the alien world.
As the twin suns cast their ethereal light across the ancient ruins where Jake Morrison and Lyreley had first found shelter from the storm.
Now, those same structures served as the stage for the most significant diplomatic event in galactic history. Representatives from 43 different civilizations had gathered, their ships forming a precise orbital mandala that spoke of protocols refined across millions of years. In the chamber where Jake and Lyreley had first touched hands to alien technology, beings from across the galaxy now stood in careful formation around the glowing walls. Jake had seen alien species before during humanity's expansion into space, but nothing had prepared him for the sheer diversity of life that the galactic network encompassed. There were beings of crystalline beauty that sang in harmonics too pure for human ears, gaseous entities that maintained coherent consciousness within containment fields, and ancient machine intelligences that had transcended their biological origins eons ago. Admiral Chen stood beside him, her military bearing unchanged, despite the overwhelming strangeness of their situation. Her pragmatic approach to the impossible had proven invaluable as they prepared for this moment.
Remember, Commander, she murmured, whatever happens here affects every human being in existence. No pressure.
Lyreley moved between the groups with graceful diplomacy, her enhanced linguistic abilities allowing her to communicate with species whose languages existed in dimensions human throats couldn't reach. Her clothing had evolved into something that seemed part formal wear and part living art, responding to the presence of each delegation with subtle changes in color and pattern that conveyed respect in dozens of different cultural contexts.
The test, they had learned, would be conducted through the network itself. Jake and Lorelei would interface with the ancient systems while representatives from the galactic community observed, evaluating not just their technical competence but their philosophical readiness for true interstellar cooperation.
The process is simple in concept, explained the entity that served as the convergence coordinator, a being of shifting light patterns that had introduced itself as Echo of First Thought. Your partnership will be presented with scenarios that have challenged our network throughout its history.
How you respond will determine whether your species understand cooperation well enough to join us safely. Jake placed his palm on the central control surface, feeling Lorelei's familiar presence as she joined him. Over the past weeks, their mental connection had deepened to the point where he sometimes wasn't sure where his consciousness ended and hers began.
It should have been terrifying, this loss of individual boundaries, but instead it felt like coming home to a part of himself he'd never known was missing. The first scenario materialized around them with startling reality. They found themselves standing on a dying world, its atmosphere poisoned and its star flickering toward premature collapse. 2 refugee fleets hung in orbit, one human, one Carolith, both desperately seeking resources to reach new homes.
But there was only enough fuel and supplies for one fleet to complete the journey. Jake felt the scenario's emotional weight settling over him like a physical burden.
These weren't just abstract test subjects. The network had drawn from real historical events, real species that had faced extinction. Somewhere in the galaxy's past, this exact situation had played out with tragic consequences. Traditional thinking suggests 3 solutions. Lorelei said, her voice carrying harmonics that indicated she was processing the scenario on multiple levels simultaneously. Competition, where one fleet takes everything and the other dies. Sacrifice, where one species chooses extinction to save the other. Or compromise, where both fleets accept reduced resources and both risk failure.
Jake nodded, feeling the weight of galactic observation as the assembled representatives monitored their response. But his enhanced awareness was showing him possibilities that purely human or purely Chiroleth thinking might miss.
There's a 4th option, he said, reaching deeper into the network's historical files. Integration. Instead of 2 fleets competing for resources, we create one fleet with shared resources and combined expertise. Through their mental link, Lorelei immediately understood his reasoning. Human engineering efficiency combined with Chiroleth biotechnology. Ships that can repair themselves. Crew members who can survive in conditions that would kill either species alone.
Together they began implementing the solution within the scenario's parameters. It wasn't simple. Combining 2 refugee fleets required unprecedented cooperation between species facing extinction. But as they worked through the logistics, something remarkable began happening. The scenario itself began responding to their approach, offering new possibilities that hadn't been apparent before. Resources that seemed depleted revealed hidden potential when approached through combined perspectives. Technologies that seemed incompatible began finding fusion points when examined through truly cooperative frameworks.
Remarkable, came a harmonic whisper from one of the crystalline observers. They're not just solving the scenario, they're transforming it. The second test proved even more challenging.
Jake and Lorelei found themselves mediating a conflict between 2 established network species, ancient enemies whose hatred ran so deep that their mutual presence threatened to tear apart entire sectors of the galactic community. The species in question were the hegemony of Shattered Suns and the Void Dancers, civilizations that had been locked in cultural conflict for millennia. Their fundamental philosophies were diametrically opposed. The hegemony valued order, structure, and the supremacy of conscious will, while the Void Dancers embraced chaos, change, and the dissolution of individual identity into cosmic unity. This one destroyed 3 previous partnerships. Echo of First Thought explained as Jake and Lorelei studied the complex history of the conflict. The philosophical differences run so deep that most species choose sides rather than seeking resolution.
But Jake found himself thinking about his own transformation through partnership with Lorelei. He'd learned that consciousness could expand without losing identity, that individual will could become stronger through connection rather than isolation.
The conflict isn't really about their philosophies, he realized aloud. It's about fear. Each side is terrified that accepting the other's worldview means losing their own. Lorelei's understanding flowed through their link, adding layers of insight that his human perspective couldn't reach alone. Among my people we have a saying, the river and the mountain both shape the valley. Opposition creates beauty, not destruction, when there's space for both to exist.
Together they began crafting a solution that honored both philosophies while transcending their apparent contradiction. They proposed a sector-based approach where hegemony worlds could maintain their ordered structures, while Void Dancer regions embraced constant change with buffer zones where both philosophies could meet and interact without threatening each other's core territories. More importantly, they suggested shared projects that required both approaches. Terraforming efforts where hegemony planning combined with Void Dancer adaptability. Research initiatives where structured methodology enhanced chaotic creativity. The scenario began shifting again, responding to their approach with new possibilities.
Ancient grudges began dissolving as the two species found ways to value their differences rather than fight over them. Trade routes opened between ordered and chaotic sectors. Cultural exchange programs began producing hybrid philosophies that enriched both traditions. The final test appeared without warning, plunging Jake and Lyrelay into a scenario that cut to the heart of their own partnership.
They found themselves facing a crisis that could only be resolved if one of them chose to sacrifice their connection to the network permanently, losing all the enhanced abilities and shared consciousness they'd developed. The scenario was devastating in its simplicity. A cascade failure in a critical network node that would doom dozens of civilizations unless someone severed their own connection to serve as a living circuit breaker.
The catch was that whoever made the sacrifice would not only lose their network integration but suffer permanent neurological damage that would leave them diminished compared to their former selves. Jake felt Lyraly's immediate willingness to make the sacrifice flowing through their bond, just as she felt his own identical impulse.
For a moment they stood frozen in mutual determination to save the other, each prepared to give up everything they'd gained together.
"No," Jake said finally. And through their link, Lyrelay felt the certainty behind his words.
This isn't about sacrifice. This is about trust.
Instead of one of them severing their connection, they chose to deepen it. Together, they opened themselves completely to the failing network node, not as individuals, but as a truly integrated partnership.
The strain was enormous. Jake felt his consciousness stretching beyond anything he'd thought possible, while Lyralay's awareness expanded into realms that her species had never imagined. But together, they became something that could absorb the cascade failure without breaking.
Their partnership, fully realized, proved capable of handling stresses that would destroy any individual consciousness. The scenario stabilized around them, the failing systems finding new equilibrium through their intervention.
More importantly, they emerged from the experience more connected than ever, their individual identities not lost but transformed into something richer and more capable.
The tests ended with a silence that seemed to encompass the entire galaxy. Jake and Lyrelay stood in the ancient chamber, still connected to systems that now hummed with new harmonies, still joined in consciousness that spanned species barriers, while representatives from 43 civilizations observed and evaluated.
Finally, Echo of First Thought spoke, its light patterns cycling through what Jake somehow knew were expressions of profound approval. In our history, fewer than one partnership in 1,000 passes all three evaluations.
Fewer still transform the tests themselves into opportunities for new understanding. You have done both.
Admiral Chen stepped forward, her military bearing formal but her voice carrying undertones of pride. "What does that mean for our species?" "It means," said Melody of Deep Waters in perfect English, her own linguistic abilities enhanced by network integration, that humanity and the Chiralith are invited to join the galactic community as full partners. Your species have proven you understand that true strength comes not from dominance but from cooperation. As the Convergence fleet began the complex process of formal induction protocols, Jake found himself looking at Lyrelay with wonder that still hadn't faded after weeks of miracles. She smiled back at him, her luminous eyes reflecting not just affection but shared pride in what they'd accomplished together. "You know," he said softly, "when you first asked me to stay until the rain passed, I never imagined it would lead to this." Lyralay's laughter was like music, carrying harmonics that spoke of joy across species boundaries. "Among my people, we believe the greatest storms bring the greatest gifts. I think your people will learn this too." Around them, the ancient chamber continued to pulse with new life as systems that had waited for eons finally found partners worthy of their secrets. Humanity and the Chiralith had passed their tests, but more than that, they had proven that cooperation could transcend any barrier when built on genuine trust and mutual respect. The galaxy would never be the same.
And as Jake Morrison stood hand in hand with an alien being who had become more than a partner, more than a friend, more than anything his species had ever dreamed possible, he realized that sometimes the most important discoveries weren't made by reaching for distant stars, but by learning to truly see the being standing right beside you. The storm had passed, but the rainbow it left behind would shine across the galaxy for generations to come.
And at its heart, the partnership between a human explorer and a Chiralith scientist would serve as proof that the universe's greatest wonders were not found in the vast emptiness between worlds, but in the connections that could bridge any distance when hearts and minds were truly open to the infinite possibilities of trust.